Welcome to this video. Most people think that a war is something related to bombs falling or people hacking other governments. But that's not the case for some wars. That is a trade war. The stuff that we use in a trade war is all around us. They are the food that we eat or the computer that you're watching this video on. As consumers, we consume a lot of foreign products. It is very easy to walk into a store and find a computer made in China or some clothes made in Bangladesh. In a world that is so dependent on trade, why do countries get caught up in trade wars, and why do they exist? To get the bare-bone understanding in what a trade war is, we need to understand what is a tariff. In simple terms, a tariff is a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports. To simplify this, the US and China are trading perfectly fine, and they are getting work done. But the manufacturing sector is complaining that it has lost a lot of jobs to China because their people have low wages and because of the final product that is made in China is made cheaper than the one in the US. So the US puts a tariff on American consumers not to buy things from China. This could mean that people will buy things that are made in America rather than things that are made in China. For China, this is a big setback for its manufacturing sector. So China puts a tariff on US goods coming into China, like soybeans, which China imports a lot from the US. If the US and China go back and forth with these tariffs, this is known as a trade war. Trade wars fall under a category of economics called protectionism. Protectionism is an economic policy of restricting imports from other countries through methods such as tariffs on imported goods, import quotas, and a variety of other government regulations. Proponents for protectionism claim that protectionist policies shield the producers, businesses, and workers of an import-competing sector in the country of foreign competitors. However, they also reduce trade and adversely affect consumers in general by raising the cost of imported goods and harm the producers and workers in the export sectors, both in the country implementing protectionist policies and in the countries protected against. Massive consensus among economists saying that protectionist policies do not help grow the economy, while free trade and deregulation help grow the economy. Meanwhile, proponents of how deregulated government may argue on how much, but pretty much all economists agree that free trade with no barriers helps grow the economy. In fact, protectionism has been implemented by some scholars as the cause of some economic crises, in particular the Great Depression. The Tariff Act of 1930, commonly known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, was an act implementing protectionist trade policies. Sponsored the act raised on U.S. tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. The tariffs under the act were the second highest in the United States in 100 years, exceeded by a small margin by the tariff of 1828. The act and following regulatory tariffs by America's trading partners were major factors of the reduction of American exports and imports by more than half during the Depression. Although economists disagree on how much, the consensus view among economists and economic historians is that the passage of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs exacerbated the Great Depression. These are one of many protectionist policies that have happened in the past. Quite recently, Donald Trump, as part of his economic policy, in January 2018, Trump imposed tariffs on solar panels and washing machines of 30 to 50%. Later, that same year, he imposed tariffs on steel, 25%, and an aluminum tax of 10% from most countries. On June the 1st, this was extended to Canada, the European Union, and Mexico. The only countries which remain exempt from the steel and aluminum tariffs are Australia and Argentina. Separately, on June the 6th, the Trump administration set off a tariff of 25% on 818 categories of goods imported from China worth $50 billion. Protectionism is frequently criticized by the economists as harming the people that it's meant to help. Mainstream economists instead support free trade. The principle of competitive advantage shows that the gains from free trade outweigh any losses, as free trade creates more jobs than it destroys, because it allows countries to specialize in the production of goods and services in which they have a competitive advantage in. Here is a more simplified version of this, and I take this from a Wendover production video that I've watched recently, and I'll link this in the description below. Let's say that you can make a pencil in 60 minutes and a sheet of paper in 30, but there is another person in this world that can make pencil in 30 minutes and paper in 60. Each of you can collaborate and you can make 2 sheets of paper that will take you an hour, and he makes 2 pencils which will take him an hour. In the end, you can trade. In result, both of you will only take an hour instead of an hour and a half. This means you will save time. Unless there's some other small pencil-making cells in your body that will say that their work shall not be deported, you will make the simpler path. You will take the simpler path, and you most often do. Also, what just happened was competitive advantage. Because you were able to make the paper quicker, that meant you had a competitive advantage over the other guy on making paper. So if we say Vietnam has a competitive advantage over making shoes, and the US has a competitive advantage in making planes, we can trade and both sides will waste less time and money spent. Overall, protectionism results in a deadweight loss. This loss to overall welfare gives no one any benefit. Unlike a free market where there is no such total loss, according to economist Stephen P. Mankiw, the benefits of free trade outweigh the losses as much as 100 to 1. According to economic historians Finlay and O'Rourke, there is a consensus in the economics literature that protectionist policies in the interwar period hurt the world economy overall, although there is a debate about whether the effect was large or small. However, economic historian Paul Brochet argued that the economic protection was possibly correlated with the economic and industrial growth during the 19th century. For example, GNP growth during Europe's liberal period in the middle of the century, where tariffs were at their lowest, averaged 1.7% per year, while industrial growth averaged 1.8% per year. However, during the protectionist era of the 1870s and the 1890s, GNP growth averaged 2.6% per year, while industrial output grew at 3.8% per year, roughly twice as fast as it had during the liberal era of low tariffs and free trade. According to Dartmouth economist Douglas Irwin, that there is a correlation between high tariffs and growth in the late 19th century that cannot be denied. But correlation is not causation. Just because the economic outcome was good, this is not always the case. The outcome could have been driven by factors completely unrelated to the tariff, or perhaps could have been even better in the absence of the protection. Irwin furthermore writes that a few more observers have argued outright that high tariffs caused such growth. According to Oxford economic historian Kevin O'Rourke, it seems clear that protection was important for the growth of U.S. manufacturing in the first half of the 19th century. But this does not necessarily imply that the tariff was beneficial for GDP growth. Protectionists have pointed to German and American industrialization during this period in evidence in favor of their position. But economic growth is influenced by many factors other than just trade policy, and it is important to control for these when assessing the links between tariffs and growth. A prominent 1999 study by Jeffrey A. Frankel and David H. Romer found, contrary to free trade skeptic claims, while controlling for relevant factors, that trade does indeed have a positive effect on growth and incomes. Free trade is also very important in reducing global conflict. This is because if countries do trade with each other, they're less likely to start a war with each other. This is one of the key fundamental reasons why European Union was created. Throughout the history of Europe was one of the continents known for starting some of the most brutal, horrific wars of all time. Wars like World War I and World War II are some of them. For that reason, a bunch of economists said if they could economically bind the European nations together with trade and economics, then countries will be more likely to try to trade with each other rather than fight. This has evidence to back this up, and normally the continent had a lot of wars. Holy smokes, Europe needs to take a chill with this fighting. And they have. There's been no big war since World War II. One could say it's because people don't want to start a war because we now live in the nuclear age, but trade does have a significant impact, and people feel more as one people rather than many different states. So thus, people are less tempted on starting wars. In the end, free trade is one of the main driving forces for a global economy that we live in. Although free trade may cause some job losses in the short term, but in the overall long-term approach, it is proven to have created a higher quality of life for all of us. Just before leaving, I want to say, free trade is as good as broccoli. You might think it's rotten, but it's good for you. please watch some of my other videos here, and thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.